the adoption and application of the golden rule in business, which adoption and application to be not only altruistically and idealistically, but commercially sound and successful, have attracted the attention of people in every avenue of our national life, not only of commercial men and institutions, but also of churches and church organizations. In the year 1921, the A. Nash Company has made some tremendous strides since the Rev. F. Ernest Johnson, Secretary of the Commission on the Church and Social Service of the Federal Council of the Churches of Christ in America, wrote the following unsolicited article regarding our aims and activities. I gratefully appreciate the worth of such testimony and satisfy my acknowledgement thereof by inserting it here. It must be remembered that it is a record of the beginnings. In the days in which Mr. Johnson's write these, we were in the elementary experimental stage. We are still experimenting, but our most severe critic, whosoever he may be, is bound to confess that in the spirit of the Golden Rule, the A. Nash Company has done quite a little bit of forging ahead, a concern which celebrates a period of nationwide depression and a trembling market by expanding its quarters, increasing outputs and raising wages, commands the interest of everybody. And when it is learned that the owner of the business attributes this success to his acceptance of the Christian doctrine of the brotherhood of man, the matter becomes the more arresting. I once heard a Christian employer say that while he was satisfied and a man could be a Christian and succeed in his business, he doubted as if he could make as much money if he discarded his religion. Of similar import was the statement of a Tammany official in the city, New York, who was when asked how he squared his organization activities with his Presbyterian affiliations. He replied, "To be frank, I find being a Presbyterian in Tammany Hall is a serious handicap." On the whole, probably the Golden Rule does not produce the biggest profits in the competitive business or professional life. The colossal fortunes in this country were not amassed by the strict regard for the Sermon on the Mount. But when a man is not engaged in a mere commerce, but in the business of production, where his success depends on the cooperation of a host of the wage earners, being a Christian has a quite different significance. At least the story of the A. Nash Company, the manufacturers of clothing in Cincinnati, so indicates. Arthur Nash's prime interest business is that of a man who is seeking first the kingdom of God. It must be granted, therefore, that his establishment is not typical. He has not an ordinary concern for the manufacturers of profit. Yet, the important thing about his enterprise is that if he had set out to make the most possible money in manufacturing clothes, he could scarcely have hit upon a more profitable method than his Christianity led him to. Mr. Nash believes that there is a law of business and of industry which is just as inexorable as the moral law, which is in fact a moral law. In other words, he regards the human factor in life and the work as paramount, the economic factors subordinate thereto. In the competitive market, he believes brotherly cooperation will win out the competition in competition. As over against the economic determinists so numerous today, I would call Mr. Nash a moral determinist. To him, the chief actual requirement to success is to keep the Golden Rule. There is really very little to this concern at all. One of the heads of the department told me, except the fact that the workers know that they are getting a square deal, the plant has thus far been small enough for the direct democratic government. Like that, the New England town meeting. Mr. Johnson is writing of the year 1921. When Mr. Nash wants his worker to decide a matter of concern to them and calls a meeting as a father assembles his family. A bit parentalistic, perhaps. The whole plant is in that stage. But there is nothing in his theory and his attitude towards worker to prevent introducing a representative plan as the plant grows. Mr. Nash declares publicly that the labor unions are indispensable as a guarantee of right to the workers. But he thinks that ideally that these rights should be assured in a different way. He has started the matter thus. I am opposed to the open shop movement, although the A. Nash Company is not unionized. So long as the avaricious organizations of the capital continue, I can conceive no worse conditions of abject servitude than for labor to be unorganized. At the last meeting of my help, I offered a resolution that was passed unanimously that we would make no clothes for the firm fighting for the union, and we would look in disfavor of the employee that is taking the place of a union sticker. This shows the attitude of our company. An open shop, as a National Chamber of Commerce sees it, or as a closed shop of the unions sees it, is no part of the solution of the industrial problems. And in their fights, they trample under the foot the principles that would solve their problems. These things stand out as of first importance in Mr. Nash's enterprise. First, the way in which he approached it and assumed the responsibility for it. His primary assumption was not that the industry must pay, but that his confidence must be satisfied. He acquired a small factory without realizing what the payroll figures really meant to the workers. He discovered presently that the average wage was $7 a week, and that there were aged women in the factory who were getting $4 a week. He decided at once to pay a living wage and to run on that basis as long as he could, and when he failed, go out of business and buy a farm. In other words, the compulsion for him came not from the business, but from his conscience. Mr. Nash knows, and anybody, that idealism will not compensate in the financial failures of business, and that a policy of bankruptcy has no permanent social value. But his determination to be governed by a Christian motive saved him from many well-intentioned businessmen who allow the rules of game to dominate them and to complacently accept the verdict that it can't be done. The second arresting feature is the astonishing results in production, which followed the change in policy. He announced the new wage scale. Mr. Nash told his employees that he proposed to follow the golden rule and asked of them that only they should govern themselves by the same standard. From that moment, the entire establishment was on a new basis. Instead of failing, the concern began to succeed as never before. The employees were apparently actuated by motives entirely new. They were getting a square deal, and the industry meant to them personally for the first time. With this, their new fortunes were bound up. They had something on stake. They had, like owners, a vested interest in a concern. Then, too, they experienced a very human response to a human appeal. They began to enjoy the thrill of the cooperation. Production increased to 1,000 in 1 year. During the first half of 1920, the depression of post-war falling heavily upon the industry, the A. Nash Company did more business than in all previous years. Even in the terrific months July to November in 1920, the Nash Company's production steadily increased. The consumer was safeguarded in respect to price and quality, as were the employees in respect to the wages, and Mr. Nash's customers kept buying. He took larger quarters, turning to account, and abandoned whiskey distillery and increasing his working force 600% from among his employees' friends without advertising for help. Just now he's expanding again. This time it is the bottling week of a one-time famous brewery that is being transformed into a Golden Rule factory. Of course, there is no general argument among the Christian businessmen as to just what the Golden Rule means in the terms of wages and profits. Should the return of capital be 6, 7, or 8%? What is the governing principle? How shall the profits under this fair return be disposed of? Should it be divided between the employer and worker? Or should the consumer receive a part in reduced prices? Perhaps any particular arrangement is arbitrary, and possibly the Nash Plan should be regarded as an exploration into the areas of industrial ethics. But the spirit of his undertaking and purpose are of deepest import, and the results seem to be quite unprecedented. Mr. Nash's social attitude has been tested by the steady increases in the earnings of the business. When he proposed the sharing of profit with his employees, replied, with not a little wisdom, that they would take theirs in wages. But the wages advance did not keep up with profits, and Mr. Nash was troubled by the money he was making out of the other men's labor. He appreciated his workers, and again they agreed to take 50% of profits, after the capital has been allowed 7%. Even such an arrangement in a highly successful business can easily make a fortune for the owners. But Mr. Nash takes the stewardship idea very seriously. He puts his profit into the expansion of business and continues to live simply, and to get his satisfaction in constantly increasing range of the application of the Golden Rule. He believes that the profit on the goods he manufactures should be limited, and his prices are calculated to yield but $1 on a suit of clothes. Thus, he feels that he is socializing this industry. by paying more than usual wages, making business partners of his workers, keeping down prices to the consumers, and applying the surplus to the most useful ends possible progressive extensions of the industry. The third outstanding feature of this enterprise has to do with the attitude and mutual relations of the workers following the adoption of the Golden Rule. When the profit sharing was adopted, the plan proposed by Mr. Nash for distributing the profits on the basis of the wages paid, he was astonished to receive presently a petition signed by the employees that were receiving more than $60 a week, asking that the division be on the basis of time worked rather than wages done. The higher paid workers, therefore, on their own motion, thus relinquished their claim to a considerable sum of money in order that the lower paid workers, whose needs were greater and could be better provided for. Moreover, Mr. Nash thought that no one should be allowed to participate in the profit sharing who had not been employed in the factory for 6 months. He pointed out that an employee had been known to remain for a few weeks, leaving soon after the bonus was paid. This is considered unfair to the others. But his employees considered the matter and reversed Mr. Nash's judgment. They regarded it being more in keeping the principle of the Golden Rule to assume the most genuine and above-board motives of every person employed in the factory. When the salesmen in the factory began to urge that the prices of the suits of clothes in the factory should be advanced, Mr. Nash called the fellow workers together to determine the part of the Golden Rule to play in the matter of price fixing. It was agreed that the consumer should be a party of its operation, and the prices on which the goods were to be sold was fixed in the view of the conclusion. Thus, at a time when suits of clothes were selling from anywhere from $50 to $100 a suit, the Nash Company was selling direct to the consumer at the prices of $16 and 50 coats to $29. More recently, after a special wage adjustment to absorb existing profits had been made, it was found that there is still a substantial surplus on every suit of clothes sold. The workers thereupon decided that half of this profit should be given to the consumers in the shape of increased value in goods, trimmings, and so forth. When unemployment reached serious proportions last autumn, the Nash employees placed before their president a most unusual request. They asked that the company, if it were possible, secure enough business to furnish unemployment to the jobless clothing workers in Cincinnati. They even volunteered to accept a wage cut, if necessary, and if that would not be the case, to take a 4-week vacation so that the needy workers might get employed in their places. There can only be one valid opinion about any system that liberates generous impulses in this fashion, that it represents an epochal achievement in industry and proves, moreover, the worklessness of the Golden Rule. It is more than 2 years ago since this article was written, and on the date on which it is based were brought together some time previously. It is therefore a quite early account of what I, together with my co-workers, see out to do. As I intimated the commencement of this chapter, we have made great advances since the year 1921, but our development is precisely along the lines described by Mr. Johnson. We have put our hands to the plough and are not looking at the back, trusting to be found fit to have some glimpse of the kingdom of God.